Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here, your host of UnWoke.Academy. It looks like we are set up and rolling on 4 different live stream platforms. I did figure out what I was doing wrong on Rumble. That was, of course, on me. It was a little frustrating. A few days there was not going live on Rumble, but as I suspected, there's a little bit of a learning curve to this thing. So, in case you don't know the backstory, a couple of weeks ago, Ken Walls from Breakthrough Walls was a guest on my program, and he recommended some streaming software called EV So I've got EV It's got a strange name. I had to write it down and ask him for the spelling to make sure I was hearing it correctly. And you are hearing it correctly. It is EV Mux. I have no idea why they came up with that name for it, but it's software for streaming live. And I've tried it out, and he's right. It is pretty cool software. It just took me a little time to get up and running and get up to speed on it. So now what we have is my ability to live stream and answer your questions, which reminds me, I have to get myself in the habit of looking at the screen where comments will pop up. So if you're watching this and a question occurs to you, then feel free to dive right in, post the question. And as I've said before, and will continue to say, if you're somewhere where you can't engage or you're nervous about asking the question or think that it might lead to some difficulty or problem on your side, feel free to send the question to me directly and I'll ask it anonymously. So the next time we do a podcast, I'll ask your question without using your name or information and make sure that we get the answer out there because who knows, there may be other people with the same question you have. And by the way, there is no such thing as a dumb question in my book because I believe, having spent decades in the world of finance, that it is designed to be confusing. There's a lot of stuff, and heck, I don't have one within arm's reach, but I get these prospectus all the time from these different money managers. And it's only because I've made a career focus on reading the gosh darn things that I can make sense of them. So I don't fault anybody if you have questions about what in the heck is going on here with this financial thing or another. It can be confusing. So ask your questions, ask away, and I will try to find answers for you and get them back out into the public with keeping you anonymous. Over the last few days, I've done a few focused segments on 401k plans and things like them and how they run. Apparently, 2 episodes wasn't enough because it seems like, and you'll have to bear with me because this is an area of focus that has been an almost exclusive, obsessive sort of focus for over 2 decades. It's actually how I built my career in the administration of workplace retirement plans, things like 401k. Some of it gets a little bit technical and you don't really need to know it, but it doesn't hurt to know those things. And a lot of it, if you do know, you can start advocating for yourself in a different sort of a way wherever you work. If you don't have a 401k plan, for instance, wherever you work, and that includes individuals, sole proprietors, if you have an LLC, you can start one. It's referred to as a solo K plan, and there are some advantages to that. So, as we dive into this world, it can seem daunting, and I recognize that. I understand it. But my objective, the reason that I dive into these sorts of things and get you the detail and the answers and the specs that I do, is because I know for sure that it can't hurt and it will probably help. So, yesterday I talked about the way that fees are subtracted. And there can be a lot of hidden fees, and they skim off of your earnings in your 401k plan. And again, just for any new audience, I want to say that I use the term 401k in a general, in a loose sense. There are lots of different types of workplace retirement plans like 403b, 457. There are thrift savings plans, union plans, all kinds of stuff. I've worked on I believe all of them. I've worked even way back when SARSEP used to be a thing. They don't really exist anymore, except the ones that were established prior to I forget what year they were phased out. Those are grandfathered in. SEP plans, simple plans. I've worked on all of them. And there is one thing that's universally true. The providers of those plans want to they want to command as high a fee as they can get, and in exchange for that provide as little service as you'll put them on the hook for. That's universally true, and it's true in most every negotiation. But there's something that occurred to me after I did yesterday's segment on it, focused on the fees and the impact that those have. And it was actually Albert Einstein that made the comment, or he's credited with making the comment. You can't find actual direct ties to him, but I think that he probably made the following comment. It's credited to him. Albert Einstein said that the single greatest power in the universe is the power of compound interest. The reason he said that is it is amazing. It's almost like magic. It's wonderful what happens when you're growing money in an environment where it compounds, which means that every year, if you're getting growth in your account, the growth also experiences growth. And then it's growth on top of growth on top of growth on top of growth over years. Well, as I've said now in episode 1 and episode 2 yesterday, and I'm going to reiterate and say again, you can't have control over your investment returns. You can make speculative, educated guesses, and hopefully you have good people working on your behalf, making good investment menu choices. That's that list of typically around 15 mutual funds. And hopefully they do a good job of giving you an offering that includes worthwhile investments. But you can't control what's going to happen with those investments. Nobody can. They can make educated guesses. That's it. As far as growth of your IRA or your 401k or simple or SEP or 403b, whatever, the one thing that you can control is fees. People figured that out a long time ago. I was one of those people starting in early around 2002 in earnest, and then going through Wall Street. I worked in retirement plans on Wall Street for some years. And then after that, when I formed my own company, I began really raising the alarm bell, or kind of ringing the bell, I should say, for fee transparency, for disclosure of conflicts of interest that can siphon money out invisibly and subtract from earnings. Connected to that as a whole realm of conversation that typically takes place at a very high level with government conversation. Government typically leads this big conversation around what's called unfunded liability, which I'll quickly sum up as the difference between people's expectations in retirement and the amount of money available to cover it. That's unfunded liability. You have lots of unfunded liability, unfortunately, because there have been major promises made for decades to a lot of people, and there simply isn't the money there to cover it. So the one thing that we can control, we the people, you, the investor, you can control fees. So unfortunately and fortunately, it's a little bit of there's a good side to it, but it wasn't as good as it could have been. In the lead up to 2012, there were some regulations that got bantered about, and they were pushing for conflict of interest disclosures for anybody touching a workplace retirement plan. And I want to pause right there to draw a distinction. If you have a personal financial planner or advisor who consults for your family or does something in investment management for you personally or your family, that's different. I applaud you. I think that's probably, hopefully, a wonderful experience for you. That individual is different than the type of people who work on the administration and the due diligence on the running of workplace retirement plans. That's a different thing. And I've argued, I continue to argue for decades now, that those are two distinct roles and there is a conflict of interest. There are plenty of people out there that sort of try to stick their toe in both waters. They try to work on the administration of workplace retirement plans, doing things like education and plan design and fee negotiations and all that stuff, but also try and work on the personal financial planning. I've already said several times that I wholeheartedly and adamantly believe that that's a conflict of interest, and people and companies should not do that. There are plenty of companies out there and they frustrate the heck out of the marketplace by going in and doing consulting, I'm air quoting, on the administration of a workplace retirement plan. And then many of them say, oh, now that we've found all these flaws, let me introduce you to my pals down the hall at my same company, and they'll come in and do the plan administration and work for you on your plan. And then they go in and they'll sell banking services or insurance products or investment management or personal financial planning or whatever. And almost invariably, I find that what they've done is reintroduced or just replace some conflicts of interest with other conflicts of interest. And then they just start siphoning different money out of the plan. And that's a big part of the reason that we have such unfunded liability and so many people that are frustrated with the experience they have with 401k plans and things like them. That's why I started the company that I did in 2012, to address those things clearly and candidly. I started a company. I'm just going to describe to you the typical conversation. And again, I'm going to say, I've lost track of how many times I've said this. I have a company that provides a service. And if you want to call me up, I'd be delighted to speak with you. But my big hope is that many, many people out there hear my plea and copy me. Take everything that I'm saying and go and tell your financial firm, your financial advisor, your buddy, your brother-in-law, your sister-in-law, whatever, the people that you know that work in the world of finance, ask them to listen to my argument. My argument and the way that we conduct ourselves, because it's clearer, cleaner, easier, it strips out conflicts, it allows for better fee negotiations on behalf of individuals. And really, it's just a win-win, win-win-win all the way around, with one possible loser in this scenario. And that's the big financial firms and the providers. They don't like the way that I approach things. Here's what this looks like. And again, I believe that I've coined this and I created it. As far as I know, nobody else was doing this before me, but I don't care. I'm telling you in the hopes that you will go out there and duplicate the things that I do. When I'm asked to go into a boardroom and I have the opportunity to, again, I'm air quoting, sell a 401k plan, I go in with a blank sheet of paper, actually a stack of them, knowing that typically the conflicts of interest that I disclosed yesterday, I talked about them, the finder's fees and the override fees and the 12B1 fees and the commissions that are made and the cross-selling and everything. I go in knowing that I have shaped my company in a way that does not allow that. And so what I do at the boardroom table, it's eye-opening, and I always get comments, um, and it raises an eyebrow. When I go in and sit around the table, before I say much of anything, I'll hand everybody a blank sheet of paper. And I'll tell them that that sheet of paper represents two things. That is my conflict of interest disclosure document, and it is my fee for whatever services we arrive upon. And so we'll talk. How many times do they want me there? What services do they want? Am I doing education? Am I helping with this, that, and the other thing? And we spell it all out. They'll make some notes. And at the end, we'll arrive at a flat fee and we'll circle it. I'll put some initials next to it. And I'm documenting the fact that I cannot receive a penny difference. There is no conflict of interest. It's not allowed by contract, by design. That I've been arguing since I started doing manual fee disclosure in 2006, 6 years before the federal government and Department of Labor mandated it in workplace retirement plans. So, knowing that and advocating for that, again, the reason that I went through that description is I hope that more people will start doing that. That actually launched originally as fee-based 401k. Then I started fee-based 403b, which is kind of a cousin to 401k plans. And then that actually turned into plan partners. So actually, I still own those domains. If you type in fee-based 401k or fee-based 403b or a couple of other ones, that redirects to plan partners. That's the company that I formed. And again, just for clarity, and so you understand why I'm doing this podcast, I would be happily, merrily along my way doing that without interruption. And I would not be doing a podcast were it not for the fact that starting in my observation around 2015, the woke and woke definitions started invading Wall Street. They started replacing all of the tried and true, clearly defined metrics and mechanisms. All of the analytics, virtually all of it, got replaced with this sort of virtue signaling of the diversity, equity, and inclusion and environmental, social, and governance and all that stuff. And as soon as I learned that nobody out there can answer my questions about what it actually means, how they're defining it. Because if they can't define it, then there is no truth to it. And if there's no truth to it, they can't continue to make the claim that they're moving towards some greater good. And I've said a number of times, anybody that wants to argue, the first thing to know is if you were on the far left, if you're progressive, green, you're very concerned about climate change and you're alarmed by those things, just know that I've done the due diligence, and the funds, the investments out there that are claiming to service you, they're not. It's veneer. I haven't found any example yet. There are sustainable mutual funds that should appeal to the far left, for purposes of clarification and to be clear about my position. I am very far right conservative. That's fine. Everybody should be able to have answers and whatever they want. I think it's a free world. But I'll tell those people on the far left progressive that they're also being lied to. They're being lied to because I think it's referred to now as greenwashing. They're, they're what's happening with these investment managers because they can't define it. They're not telling us what's wrong, what the issues are, and how they plan to fix it. If they did, I would accept their arguments. And then from there, I would tell them that they're going to have to prove it over time in order for the estimated $35.7 trillion in U.S. retirement dollars, that's just in the U.S., to be diverted into that stuff. I've been asking for 4 years. I have access to more money managers than probably most anybody else in the world of finance. I talk to all of them, as far as I know, virtually all of them, even the ones that I hadn't heard of, just little small ones. And the ones that are embracing this label of ESG, DEI, and all that stuff, the ones kowtowing to the corporate equity index, they can't define it. Nobody has defined it. I can't find it on a website. I can't find it in a press release. I can't find it anywhere. So until proven otherwise, I'm treating it as virtue signaling. And virtue signaling for an individual, sure, have at it. If it makes you feel good, do the thing. But in the world of managing money on behalf of other people, not okay. So what we're seeing is finally the beginnings of some real pushback. We have the United Airlines, or American, I don't think United exists anymore. American Airlines Pilots Union, the New York Workers Union, 21, I think, states attorneys general, and even the Secretary of State of Indiana are pushing back. Many of them are lawsuits against money managers for the use of the stuff. So that everyone, or a growing number of people, certainly not everyone, I wish it was everyone, a growing number of people out there are pushing back against these woke money managers and asking them, put up or shut up. Stop talking about how you're going to make the world a better place through this virtue signaling veneer of saving whatever, ESG, DEI stuff, and go back to the actual verifiable, quantifiable method of investment analysis. That will get us out of the globalist bubble. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on today as a follow-up to episode number 2 of Beyond the Veil of 401k plans is who gets paid. So I talked about the types of fees that skim off of investment returns and then create that unfunded liability, or in the case of 401k, the often lackluster results that are short of what you might expect. The lower you can make those fees, ultimately, the better off you are. But I said at the beginning of this episode, I'm going to get into plan fees and where they go in a moment. But as I said in the beginning of this episode, there are actually a few different thoughts at once. Sort of parsing how to put this in an understandable way. I talked about the July 2012 requirement that fee disclosures be handed out and conflict of interest disclosures. The result of that, I think a lot of people had their heart in the right place, but enter politics. Because what ended up happening in Washington, D.C. is some really big people with a lot of money threw money around, and they sort of neutered the thing. The providers out there, the people who take money out of 401k plans that skim off of the growth, some of them got a complete exemption to disclosing actually how much money they make, which is really frustrating. And it makes parts of some relationships and some 401k plans really, really difficult to determine. So let me put that in the context for my experience. I'm often asked to come in, and we're doing several of them currently. I'm asked to come in and evaluate the whole scope and all the relationships and the to make sure that the fees are appropriate and commensurate with the services that are being offered. It's fee benchmarking is what it's referred to as. If I can't see what a company is making, how do I determine if it's reasonable? Nobody should be able to do that. So we have this weird conflict that came out of politicians in 2012, where there's a requirement by Department of Labor and the federal government saying, if you offer a 401k plan, you're responsible for what's called fee reasonableness. That means if you're siphoning off $50,000 out of your 401k plan to pay one of the service providers, one of the companies doing services for the 401k plan, you need to know that $50,000 is reasonable. Sounds good, right? But what if you don't know? What if it's nearly impossible to know if they make 10,000, 50,000, or 300,000? That's what some of these providers succeeded in doing in the lead up to July of 2012. Well, we make some pretty good progress because we can do a lot with our knowledge of different service providers. The ones that didn't get the exemptions, what they've ended up doing, because they, again, going back to the comment that I made at the beginning of this segment, they would like to make as much as possible for as little responsibility as possible. So many of them create these massive conflict of interest and service provider disclosure documents. They're huge. They're these massive, thick booklets. It's like reading one of these proposed pieces of legislation from Congress. These thick, fat booklets with fine point print that's hundreds and hundreds of pages, and you have to try and decipher that. It's a pain in the neck. But ultimately, we can get to the bottom and we can figure out what they're actually being paid. So that's their way of trying to get to the point where they're siphoning off big fees for little service. And many of them, most of them, almost all, lead with indemnification for themselves. They want to indemnify themselves from responsibility. So what they're saying is you, the company, whatever your company name is, the American Manufacturing Widget Company or whatever, you're offering a 401k plan. We'll provide services to you for fees, and you have to dig to figure that out. And in exchange for that, we're going to indemnify ourselves because if something goes wrong in kablooey, you're on the hook. There's a point I want to make connected to that, and that's who the good guys are. Who are the good guys? I'm going to use an analogy referencing politicians. It's actually more of an adept analogy than you might think. Politicians often are good at reading teleprompters. They're good at smiling and glad handing and shaking your hand and smiling you in the face and saying, I'm going to be tough. I'm going to get out there and really give them what for, and I'm going to go to bat for you. And they say all sorts of stuff to your face. And then they disappear and they're weak and simpering and don't do the right things. They don't advocate for you, and life gets worse. I think a lot of us feel that. We feel that we're not getting from our politicians what we should. And I'm going to make the argument that overwhelmingly, when it comes to the administration of workplace retirement plans, we have very, very similar people. They end up extraordinarily rich in questionable and dubious ways. And while they show up every once in a while, maybe every election cycle or something, and say, yeah, I'm going to get out there and I'm really giving it my all and I'm tough, and they say the right things and they read off of a script. I've literally seen that. They're reading off of a script. They're coached on what to say to try and land that HR department or that CFO or the benefits director and sell that 401k plan and move it over to that new provider, put it there, keep it there, and then collect those fees, the finder's fees and the override fees and the commissions and the 12B1 and all of that stuff. And meanwhile, they are not doing their job and they are not advocating for the lowest possible fees with the best possible services. And they're not advocating for that company to be on the hook for some of the things that they do. Generally speaking, once they buy in on the kickbacks and they start enjoying those kickbacks, often what ends up happening is they just let their guard down, or I don't even know if they ever put the guard up in the first place. They allow whatever those providers want. So back to the key point, adding to yesterday's discussion of how the fees are skimmed off and diverted out of your retirement plan and into other pockets. I decided to make a third episode because I want to talk a little bit about where the fees go. And then I'm going to make a point. You have legal fees, tax and accounting fees, what's called custodian. Some combination may apply to you. So again, starting at the top. Legal fees, tax and accounting fees, custodial fees, because there's a custodian, sub-TA fees may apply, investment management fees, platform provider fees, and sometimes there may be a third-party administrator. Often, I find the third-party administrators, at least the good ones, are worth their weight in gold. Those are the people that more often than not do a good job of advocating on your behalf. Not that every plan needs to have a third-party administrator, but more often than not, I find they're helpful. Knowing that those fees exist, or some combination of those fees, why not apply the philosophy that I have? And I've said at the beginning of this discussion, that white sheet of paper, that blank sheet of paper discussion, go to each of them, or some of them, or all of them, and ask them, what's your number? What number do you need? What will make you a profitable provider at a reasonable fee, and decide to flat fee them? And sometimes the company, if they're a profitable company, may decide to pay them directly, which moves that subtracted fee, typically being skimmed out of your 401k plan, from whatever it is to zero. Cross it off the list. If the company pays them directly and they agree that they're not receiving a single dollar of revenue out of the workplace retirement plan, no money subtracted from the 401k plan, it's a win. It's a win for your future, for your beneficiaries, for your retirement success. That is the way that we can control. Remember, I said we can't control the returns on those investments? Well, we can't. You can control that. That's fee negotiation. Then you go through all of them, one after the other, figure out what services you're getting, what fee you're paying, is the fee reasonable, and then can you negotiate it? Can you get better services? Can you reduce the fee? Can you do both? Often you can, especially plans that have been parked and sort of uh, derelict for many years. And that's a lot of plans. A lot of plans start off, and let's face it, I don't mean to disparage human resources offices. They're very busy. And this is highly nuanced. I find plenty, and listen to yesterday's example where I talk about that was literally the senior managing partners of a major law firm in yesterday's example. If they can't see it, don't blame your HR office for not seeing it. But as soon as somebody goes through with a fine-tooth comb and does those fee negotiations line item by line item, provider by provider, and get them to a flat fee, if you can, then you know it's clear, it's transparent. And typically, when you go through that process, it becomes monumentally worth it, because that's more money in your pocket in the future. It means a better plan. If you're an employer, if you offer a 401k plan, if you are an HR, this, it I won't say it can't fail. It certainly can't hurt. Going through these steps means that on the tail end, once you go through these steps, you can get out there. And I've had these education sessions. I do education and enrollment meetings. I've done them for decades now, from Southern California up to Connecticut, down into Florida and Georgia, and most states in between. I think the only state I haven't personally worked in is Hawaii, but I actually have worked on some plans as part of a team that affected Hawaii. But anyway, um, when you go into these education sessions, I distracted myself. Uh, that's me with the tangents. But when you go in, oh, that's what I was going to say, is if you are an employer or HR office or something, when you're able to go in and tell them this work and how unique that is, and you have an outstanding, suddenly you will skyrocket to one of the best retirement plan offerings available. So all things being equal, if you're competing for top talent for your company, you can go out there and make a very unusual claim with very low fees. Now, I'm going to round that out with something I started to touch on earlier, which is the downside to the fee negotiation, or excuse me, the downside to the fee disclosure requirements and conflict of interest disclosures that became a requirement in July of 2012. And that's the hide the fees game. We have a lot of people that went to ultra low just ridiculously cheap investments. So let's say here's how it worked, and it's just an unfortunate thing, but it's what they did in order to be able to continue to maintain the advisor fees or broker fees or commissions or whatever siphoned out of the plan. So let's say that prior to 2012, you had a plan with lots of different investment options, and all in, your plan was costing you 1.5% every year, just siphoned off. As soon as the fee disclosures were required, a lot of brokers, a lot of financial planners and whatever, the bank reps and all the accountants, all the people out there that have been selling 401k plans for years, they kind of freaked out a little bit, because if it suddenly became known that their plan fees were 1.5%, they figured they would lose some clients. And so they all went, or not all, but many of them went to a couple of these mega ultra cheap investment indexes. As I've disclosed, I'm going to use Vanguard as a representative example. Vanguard, as we disclosed on UnWoke.Academy in that, well, actually a series of episodes, but look at the one that we did for codename Yosemite Sam. That is done to protect the identity of an individual. We looked at Vanguard funds and found that because they're just sort of a computer program and set to index, and the index has turned into this globalist bubble, that there's very little distinction or difference between many of these Vanguard funds. In fact, the top holdings in, I want to say 28 of the 34 that we looked at, was almost identical, just slight differences in the percentages. Well, that's a byproduct of brokers out there living off of the commissions or fees or whatever coming out of 401k plans and into their pockets. They didn't want to lose those clients. And so what they did is just went to mega cheap investments in order to make up the difference. And so that 1.5% fee, maybe it went down to a little less than 1%, but maybe they're keeping 0.5%. But if they're keeping 0.5% and then they get all the other fees on top of that, like maybe they get finder's fees or override fees, which we covered yesterday in yesterday's second episode. That means that you have somebody highly paid not to do their job. That's a problem. It's a big part of the reason that we have unfunded liability. So now between these episodes, actually, there is one additional note. What I've covered are what I call soft costs. That's the money that sort of gets siphoned off of 401k plans. There are also hard costs, and those should also be negotiated, but they rarely are. So you've got, let's say you're in a 401k plan and you want to take a loan. What is the percentage, the interest that you have to pay? If you take what's called a QDRO, or Qualified Divorce Resolution Agreement, QDRA, Qualified Divorce Resolution Order, O for order. If you do one of those, what's your fee? All of those they might seem like nuisance fees, but they add up. And they often can be negotiated. But the person who's receiving the 0.5%, and then all those other fees, they're very unlikely, almost impossible for them to go back to that company that's paying them off and hard-nosed negotiate. So we have, using the politician example, we have people that work in the world of finance or banking or insurance or whatever, accounting, that sell these 401k plans and become comfortable and complacent with high fees being deducted out of them. I'm not okay with that, clearly. It's more than my claim to fame. It's how I hung out my shingle. After years dedicated to this marketplace, into serving 401k plans and all the things like them, that's why I was able to build a company that developed and implemented that blank sheet of paper approach. That's what I wanted to cover in today's episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. I'm getting, looks like some people joined from a few different platforms a little late in the conversation. If parts of this enticed you or seemed interesting, but you weren't sure what we were talking about, go back to the beginning and re-listen. I'm also going to release this as an episode on many platforms, including OBBM Network. Our friends over at OBBM have national distribution. It's part of a 24-hour cycle. And I lost track of how many cities and states they're in. They're all over the country. OBBM Network is on Roku TV and Apple TV. It's their own dedicated network. And of course, you can also stream it. X, Rumble, and other platforms. This is Jonathan Broadbent. Thanks for listening to another episode of UnWoke.Academy. Stay tuned for the next exciting episode.